Good evening. It's Thursday, September 20th, 2018, 7:30 p.m. Calling the regular meeting of the Clawson Zoning Board of Appeals to order. Could everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Victoria, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Diane Smith.
Here.
Mr. Cook.
Here.
Mr. Hildebrandt.
Here.
Mr. Parker. Mr. Sinaki.
Present.
Ms. Scripture. Ms. Cindy Smith.
Present.
So two of our regular board members, Ms. Scripture and Mr. Parker, are absent today. So our two alternates, Mr. Cook and Mr. Hildebrandt, will be voting in their place. Okay. So we were presented with the minutes from the July 19th, 2018 meeting. Are there any comments, clarifications? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented for the the July 19th meeting for the Zoning Board of Appeals.
I support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Victoria, can you please call the roll, please?
Mr. Cook.
Support.
Mr. Hildebrandt.
Support.
Mr. Sinaki.
Yes.
Ms. Cindy Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Diane Smith.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a public hearing and consideration of a request for a dimensional variance for property located at 32 East 14 Mile Road in the City Center District from the City of Clawson Code of Ordinances as follows. Chapter 34, Land Development Regulations, Article 10, Zoning, Division 23, City Center District, Section 34-19, 34-1193A1 to allow for the construction of a new building within the required 10-foot rear yard setback. Is there, Mario, would you like to present on behalf of the city, please?
Good evening. As just mentioned, tonight we're here to discuss a dimensional variance request for a proposed redevelopment of property at 30 and 32 East 14 Mile Road. Currently, this does involve two individual lots, 30 and 32 East 14 Mile Road, the entire project. The lot at 30 East 14 Mile is roughly 20 feet in width with 100 feet in depth. The lot at 32, directly to the east of it, is 30 feet in width and 100 feet in depth. Currently, there is one structure, two-story structure on the 30 East 14 Mile site, the western half. It's a two-story structure, 20 feet by 100 feet, so it does occupy the entire lot. On the west side is the 32 East 14 Mile site, and that has a structure that is 30 feet wide by about 50 feet in depth. So it occupies approximately, basically half the square footage of the lot, and it is an existing one-story structure. The applicant is proposing to reuse the existing two-story structure at 30 East 14 Mile. They would be utilizing it on the first floor composed of a 490 square foot space for a tenant, for a future tenant, bathrooms, other common corridors, and then a 645 square foot barrel storage room as an ancillary use to a distillery. The second floor would be utilized for office space. So that's in the existing structure. Now on the proposed, on the 30 East 14 Mile site, the one-story existing structure they propose to demolish and construct a brand-new two-story structure. The new structure would be 30 feet, it's proposed to be 30 feet in width and 100 feet in depth. So they would like to occupy the entire site, similar to what's occurring on the west side. The first floor of that structure would consist of a 233 square foot leasable tenant space, while the remaining square footage in that new structure would consist of a display vault, a tasting room, and distilling and flex space for the primary use of the site, the liquor dispensary. The second floor would consist about 1,500 square feet of leasable office space, with approximately on the second floor, it would be the front 52 feet about would be composed of the office space, and then the rear 48 feet would be open air. So the distilling space to the rear of the structure would go from the ground floor all the way to the top of the 30-foot new structure. So the issue we're here for tonight is the fact that as proposed, the new structure would be 30 feet by 100 feet in depth. In our CC zoning district, right now, the ordinance standard states that there would be a required 10-foot rear yard setback. So for any structure in the CC district, they are required to have a 10-foot setback from that rear property line. So the applicant is requesting a variance from that standard. They would like to go the full 100 feet and have a 0-foot rear yard setback. So when considering a variance, there are 5 criteria listed in our zoning ordinance to be considered. The first one being whether there's anything peculiar to the property or that does not exist generally throughout the city that would require compliance with our ordinance to be a hardship. There would be some practical difficulty for the project as proposed to comply with the standard. And usually this always is in reference to any physical condition that has prevented the site from complying with whatever variance they're requesting. So in this case, something that's peculiar to the property that would negate them from meeting the full 10-foot rear yard setback. The lot, as I mentioned, is 30 feet wide by 100 feet deep. We have 100-foot deep lots found throughout our well, not fully zoned, but our traditional downtown. East 14 Mile Road, majority of the lots are 100 feet in depth. On the north side of East 14 Mile Road, those lots are 100 feet in depth. On Main Street, from Bowers all the way down on the north to Gardner on the south, those lots are 100 feet in depth. And then on the south side of West 14 Mile, those lots are 100 feet in depth from Main all the way to the high-rise. So this site in particular is generally flat. There's no topography or no other physical characteristic that makes it different to any other site. So generally speaking, the site is generally found throughout the village or throughout the city, and there's physically nothing abstract from this site compared to the rest of the sites found throughout the downtown. Other criteria we look at is whether there would be something that would that an alleged hardship would result if failure to grant the variance is substantially more than just mere inconvenience or inability to attain a higher financial return. The applicant has indicated that the operational needs of the use would require the square footage, the additional basically 300 square feet. And we just note that the fact that they have a 233 square foot leasable tenant space in the front of the structure. So if they were to lose 300 square foot on the total site building, it's possible to remove the tenant space and they would only be deficient 70 square feet and use the entire first floor square footage for the primary use of the site, the distillery. An additional criteria is whether allowing the variance will result in substantial justice being done to the applicant. Obviously, if the variance was granted, they would receive substantial justice because they would be able to acquire and utilize the site fully for how they would like to have it utilized. Another criteria is whether the variance has arisen from actions of the applicant or previous owner. the variance arises from the fact that they are requesting it. So there's, once again, nothing physical about the site that would require necessarily, or at least in our opinion, make it physically impossible for them to just construct the building at a 90-foot depth or total area instead of a 100-foot depth and having the 10-foot setback. And then whether the final criteria is whether this is based solely on financial need or circumstance. Obviously, if the applicant were to allow to have the variance, then they would have tenant space as well, so therefore they could maximize the profitability of the site. And so that is, it is a consideration. However, based on our ordinance, financial need can't be the only consideration when granting a variance. So at this time, we would have to recommend denial of the variance based on these items indicated. Those being that there are not any physical characteristics of the lot at 32 East 14 Mile that prevents construction of a new building in compliance with our standards. That the conditions of the subject site are generally found throughout downtown in particular, and that the operational need of the primary use could actually be met if in the new building constructed in compliance with dimensional standards if the leasable square footage was removed. We do note, as I mentioned, that allowing the variance would grant substantial justice to the applicant. So with that in mind, I can take any questions at any point in time or during the evening.
Okay. Are there any questions for our planner?
Yeah, I've got a question. Do we know what the intent of the ordinance is to begin with? What's to be accomplished with the ordinance?
That is a good point. I did question, because this dimensional standard is a recent adoption. I did make some questions of people that were around back when that occurred. For example, I asked the DPW and asked the DDA director, and they said they weren't sure why that standard was exactly opposed in the News District. It is true that having setbacks, zero front setback, well, we have zero front yard setbacks, we have zero side yard setbacks, and then having a zero rear yard setback is, definitely another alternative in other downtowns. So the intent of the 10-foot requirement, I just was not able to ascertain as to why that's a existing standard currently.
I'm sorry, so did you say that was recently changed the last time we changed our ordinances?
In the recent past, in the recent past. But that zero front, that 10-foot rear yard requirement, I don't believe was there previously, to the best of my knowledge. But I don't know for sure.
Okay. Okay.
I'd like to hear from the applicant, and then I'm certain that I'll have some questions of our planner.
Okay. Does anybody
Jim,
else?
do you recall, because I believe that the ordinance was adopted 7 or 8 years ago, so it wasn't like it was last week. Mm-hmm. And the downtown development district and the rest of the zoning areas have been developing based upon different scenarios. So the intent of recent, I don't know. Do you know when it was?
The downtown just adopted a new master plan, and I believe we updated the ordinances within the year.
Okay.
So that it was a 0-foot setback, and it just was within the last year. It was adopted at 10 foot. It's not known why they changed it to 10 foot. I'm making an assumption it was to allow loading areas in the back of the buildings. I think we should hear from the applicant, and then I'll have questions as well as the board on the site.
Okay. Okay. So could you state your name and your address?
Hi, my name is Steve Moore, and I'm with Arc Revival, and we're the designers on the project, and we're here to represent 30 and 32 14 Mile Road in Clawson, Michigan. Dennis Weiss, who's the owner of the building, is sorry that he could not be here tonight. His wife is actually having an emergency, medical emergency, and they actually had to go fly to Dallas for a surgery. So he apologizes for not being here. So I'd like to discuss this project, and I'd like to clear up a couple of points that I think aren't made clear in the drawings. And I think, Mario has brought up some very good points, about this variance. And I absolutely understand, and respect, like where Mario is coming from. However, I think that there are several things on the drawings and also in our write-up that haven't been translated properly that I would like to take the time to express. The first one is we started working on this project probably 18 months ago. So we started working and designing this project prior to there being this 10-foot setback, in place as far as a code goes. We have been in constant contact with the city through this whole design process. Both Jim and Joan can vouch for that. We've had several meetings with Joan. We've had several meetings with Jim and the rest of the group, Susie and Greg, which would be Mario's predecessor, regarding this project. And we've reviewed plans with them on several occasions, showing this exactly how we have it today. One of the big factors that leads to the design and what we did, I've never worked with any of you before, so this is our first time in front of the zoning board, but I have worked in Clawson and we've done a lot of projects with you guys. And I want to say that I have nothing but respect for all of your ordinances and everything that you guys do. You guys have a great community, and I'm really proud to work here. Jim can pretty much vouch for this, as can Joan. I wouldn't represent this project with this variance if I didn't think that there was a good reason to do it. I would tell our client no. And I would like to highlight a couple of the reasons that I think that we should be granted the variance. The first one is we've been working on this project, again, a year and a half before this started. We've been planning this out. The second one, which I think is, in my mind, the most important one by far, is Joan and I have discussed the downtown development and where the zoning is going and how you guys are rewriting for master planning. One of them, I don't know how familiar you guys are with your zoning and the downtown development and the requests that are happening, for the downtown development. But one of the big ones right now, which I'm fully on board with, and I think this is fantastic, is to introduce a retail portion right on the street front. Okay, so Clawson doesn't become Royal Oak, where it's all bars. You know what I mean? Where when you're driving down the street, all you see is bars. One of the things that we've been working towards with Joan is having a buffer of retail between a bar setting and the storefront, so that you're having more retail space. And this is actually part of your Clawson's ultimate master plan for the main downtown development authority area. So what we've done here, and if you can look at the plan, can I walk up to there? You guys will be able to hear me, right, if I'm standing over there?
I believe you have to take a microphone.
Do I get to do the drop the mic thing when I'm here?
Sure, whatever works.
Which one? Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? Is this good?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the area that we're talking about, and this is the building. Okay, so what happens is this portion of the building right here, okay, from this line up and over is the two-story existing structure, okay, and that takes up the full lot, the full 100 feet, so that's a zero setback on all sides. Okay, this is the building that's going to be occupied by Weiss Distillery. So what we're proposing is we're going to knock down the old coffee shop that everybody wants to see go away. We're going to do it. We're going to take it down, and we're going to build a beautiful two-story building in its place. And what we've done here and how we've designed this to protect the integrity of your future master plan, we're ahead of you guys for once instead of you guys being ahead of us, is what we've done is we've introduced a display vault, which is right here. So what this is the nature of what we're trying to accomplish here. This is called a speakeasy. Okay, so what it is you walk into this storefront area. It looks like a retail setting. It's got a vault door, and we have displays. So the idea is what we're going to do is we're going to ask Clawson craftsmen and other retailers to donate things, to put inside of this display case that we're going to put in, so that when you walk in, it doesn't look like you're walking into a restaurant. It looks like you're walking into another retail location. And then what will happen is, for instance, if it's something from Warp 7, like an action figure that's in there, it'll say purchasable, at Warp 7. So we'll have that display, and then you'll have to know a secret password, which you'll get from the website, to go through the vault door to get to the speakeasy, so it adds that a level of mystery to it. But why we've introduced that is to comply with your future zoning, or your future downtown development needs, which is to have that buffer of retail between restaurant and the street. Okay, and then what we've done is we've introduced another retail portion right here, which is in this L shape. That's the 230 square feet. Okay, and I think that this hasn't been made clear either. That 233 square feet retail area that we're adding is actually for Weiss Distillery. So that's not a leasable spot for anybody else. That's only for Weiss Distillery. So we have added that into our program. That wasn't part of the original program. We've added that in to comply with where the downtown is going with, the retail buffer. So that's not something that's going to get leased to a bookshop or another retail. There's no financial gain in it for our client whatsoever. He could just as easily sell the bottles, right out of the bar, or he could sell them at the, or at the neighboring place. But taking the buffer that is, coming in your guys' new ordinance, that's why we have that in place. So what that leaves us with is we have our speakeasy at the minimum seating occupancy that we can possibly have to financially justify building it. Okay, so we can't really cut seats from it. It's actually pretty minimum as it is. And then this whole section back here is actually the distillation equipment that takes up an X amount of square feet that we really can't change. So what has happened is, by adding these two front pieces in, that's where that 300 square feet is really, coming into play. If we remove that 300 square feet and we push our speakeasy and all of this forward to accommodate this 10-foot setback that was just put into place, we lose that buffer of retail between the speakeasy and the street. And like I said, the retail buffer has been talked about. Joan and I have been working together in Clawson for 6 or 7 years. We've had conversations about this many times. And I think that she could probably do like a much better presentation of what's coming down the road, for the downtown development and why that's being asked for. So this is something that really we're trying to, or what we started off trying to accommodate, with that future planning for you guys. So, so that's really, the essence of what we're trying to accomplish. I have to say, if you drive through the city, the downtown development area, I think that you're going to find that, would you say the majority, Dan, or? The large majority of the buildings that are in the downtown development actually have a zero rear property line. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some that don't, that have some form of setback, but there is actually more that have the full property that's built out. So those, I can name other reasons, why I think this is appropriate for us. But I think that the reality of it is the only ones that really matter are, we started the project beforehand, before this was put into place. We reviewed the project through all of our design process, through this whole thing. We've been working on this for 18 months, and we really are trying to comply with your guys' future master plan to accommodate the retail buffer. Joan, is there any chance that you might be able to explain that buffer for us?
Before Joan takes over, why don't we open it up to the board members to see if they have any questions for the applicant at this point?
I do not.
You've got on sheet A2,
Yes.
you show the rear elevation. You've got 2 roll-up doors.
Yes.
I'm guessing that's the distillery operation in the back. So
Correct.
you're going to be using doors to move barrels in and out or deliveries in the alleyway.
Yeah.
But is it going to be used for access, for customer access in and out?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, the distillery equipment, and if you can visualize how this is going to look, it's going to be amazing from the parking lot.
Sure.
Is the distillery equipment is beautiful. It's copper and brass, and all these amazing, kind of like big tubes that are 2 stories tall. So what we've done, is we have the 2 overhead doors that we're proposing to do glass for transparency into it, because we're going to keep it lit up 24 hours a day. So those 2 big doors are really, if we have to get the big 2, the big giant vats that we have to put in a route, we have to have those overhead doors, in case they have to be replaced or repaired or removed. So
Okay.
that's what those are for. But we're looking at the rear elevation of this as just as important as the front elevation, because you have all the parking, and everything behind, and we want to show off the distillation equipment. I think it's going to be really cool. So if you can picture, the upper elevation and, seeing, those 18-foot tall copper, vats
yeah.
kind of going up, all lit up at night, I think it's going to be beautiful, from the parking lot. So it's going to be great. So that's what those doors are for.
Okay. I didn't, and I don't know how, Jim, how this, the Downtown Development Authority businesses, how they dispose of garbage. I know we've got like shared garbage areas in each parking lot, and I know the one that's in this particular location's kind of messy. Through the distillation process, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to have a third party come in and remove the, I don't know what you use, corn, barley, whatever you use for the distillation process?
Yeah, I think that what's going to happen is the owner is going to be responsible for having to get rid of the majority of those goods.
Okay.
Because what that is that's basically biomass that's going to be biodegradable.
Sure.
So that's not really going to be trash. So we'll use the trash containers in the back, the dumpsters, for boxes and general garbage.
Okay.
But anything that's used for the distillation, is going to have to get removed off-site by a specialist.
Okay.
So we won't put a bunch of gross hops in your dumpster.
All right.
Or what do they make gin out of? Berries, juniper berries or something? Yeah.
Is that arrangement for waste disposal, and is that group of, I know that right now, I don't believe that this building uses the grease traps, but there's a grease dispensary, there's a large dumpster, there's something else next to it, they're all haphazard. Is that part of a shared agreement? Is that on city property? Is that leased?
That's city property, that's the city parking lot, and there's been numerous discussions through the years. I'm not even going to say it's recently, multiple years, about handling the garbage situation there. We have the same, all four quadrants of our downtown, our city parking lots with dumpsters in the city lots that get dumped multiple times a week. And that's something that we could probably charge the people in the future for it. We could, if we built a dumpster enclosure in that area, we would lose parking spots, which parking is an issue in our downtown, and they're aware of it. So, I believe that's why we haven't built a dumpster enclosure in that city parking lot. That's why the dumpsters sit out there, and the grease trap or the grease container is right next to the dumpster behind Clawson Grill.
Yes. I believe when you started out, and I was trying, you're the architect?
Designers on the project, yes.
Okay, great. If you step back and you had to execute to a 10-foot setback, what do you believe would go in that 10 by 30-foot area?
In the rear yard?
Yes.
Nothing.
Concrete?
Yeah.
Asphalt?
Correct. Yeah.
Could you go to that drawing right there? So I don't think it was clearly explained. This part of the building is remaining, and this
Correct.
part of the building is staying on this red line at a 0-yard setback. And these buildings to this side, if you can see the light shadow, is where our alley is. So this is a 5 or 7 foot wide sidewalk. So this is 5 to 7 feet wide there. So the hardship, it would be I might be using the wrong terms. It'd be a unique situation because you have a 0-yard setback on 1/3 of the building, and then a potentially 7 foot, 5 to 7 foot setback on the other corner of the building. And then to make this 10 feet, it's really not functional at that point. So you could say it was a unique situation, if you wanted to interpret it that way, for allowing the 10 feet. Now, the brewer's not here, but I believe there's a certain square footage for the distillery units and the barrel storage units
Yes.
for distilleries. And those square foot requirements have been met by your drawings?
Correct.
Okay. So could you go with that floor plan? Distillery is a little bit different than beer. It's grain alcohol that's boiled to a certain temperature, so it's a pressurized system. So they have square foot limits on this area. And then the barreling, I think it's only 300 square foot, and you got 600. But I defer to you because I know there's a law out there, either it's state or federal law, and I'm not sure what the square footage is.
That is correct, but the only problem is that on that side of the building where we actually have excess square feet, we can't have a two-story space. You know, in where we have the distillation equipment, which is in the new building where we're asking for the variance, is where we require the two-story space. You know, so that's the reason that we can't use, that 300, get an extra 300 square feet out of the other building, is because that's the two-story, equipment that goes, up and down. And it's also worth noting that the variance is only giving us square footage on the first floor, because if you look at the second floor plan, it's actually a clear story through half of the building. So we're not getting, an extra 300 square feet of office on the second floor. We're actually only occupying half of the second floor for office space.
So this is all open?
Correct. Yeah, that's all a two-story space for the large vats.
And, well, I'll go back to your original presentation. The retail space up front, which chews up the extra 300 square feet that you would gain in the back, was the intent of the DDA, and you're looking to enhance the downtown
Yes.
with the locations of that stuff. You could take that into consideration also.
Yes. So it's not, again, we're trying to make, again, the idea of Clawson for me, has always been that it's not a Royal Oak, where you're driving down the street and looking into restaurants and bars, at every single space. So we've taken that to heart over the last, several years working in your community, and we're trying to keep that buffer, which is coming in your next zoning.
Mario, do we get an elevation in there, front elevation?
Oh, and if I may add
Isn't
one,
there
one,
like the
one
cover
thing,
page or something?
while we're looking at the elevation, is we're there. This isn't about a financial gain. We're looking this project right now. The best budgetary numbers that I can put on this is we're looking at spending $1.3 million probably on this building. Having 300 extra square feet of even if leasable space, it would take us 50 years, to see some kind of but financial benefit, from 300, square feet of leasable, space. So that's really not a factor for us.
I have another question if you're ready. The Lot 42 building that you're renovating, if I read the sign properly on the front, it says it's Clawson's oldest retail building.
That is correct.
And as an architect's perspective, the renovations that you're doing, they're basically, they're not short-term.
Correct.
And so therefore, the probability that whatever renovations you did to that would maintain that structure for quite some time. And looking at that irregular setback in the rear, which is what we're talking about, if there was a high probability that the building next to you that we were comparing to was going to be demolished and something new put in, then you'd say, okay, well, we don't want to perpetuate, and we would go with the ordinance. But on the other hand, if you look at this side is going to be a major renovation, it's a historical building, it's got long-term footprint, then putting something next to it that creates another unusual situation, could possibly be part of the rationale to approve a variance. So I guess what I'm going at is, if it's the intent to maintain that particular historic building with major renovations that extend its life, that seems to be a positive statement.
Yes, that, the building right there that you're looking at, Dennis, who's the owner, is in love with that building. He's been in love with it since he was a little kid, and that's why he bought it. So, he's committed, to keeping that building the way that it is, and we're doing, enhancements to the building, to beautify it, but also preserve it.
What
And
is-
I guess I'd like
Oh,
to
I'm
ask
sorry.
the planner and Jim, is it a reasonable statement to say that because we have a public alley that is 16 feet wide, that a probable intent for access and loading and loading of the 10-foot setback is probably not as important, given that that's the alley, and I would suspect that that's probably the only use for that thing, that alley, that and trying to get in and out of the municipal parking lot, although if I remember correctly, all the parking spaces abut the alley, so you still have to go around it anyways.
Correct.
So,
I would venture to say that that's true because in certain areas where there was not an alley, having a 10-foot area, while narrow, at least lays a property, some loading area. But in this case, they are directly adjacent to a 16-foot wide alley, which is pretty substantial for an alley. And I did have conversations with the DPW director, and he mentioned that currently in the downtown where there are alleys, there are not any incidents where loading is, if loading was taking place in an alley, that it would prevent them from access or prevent them from performing city functions at the same time. So, if the alley was to be utilized for loading, it'd be a temporary situation, and it would, at least up to this point, it's not negatively impacted anyone. So.
Remind me again, what are the plans for the second floor of that older building?
They are currently office space, and they will continue to be office space.
Oh, okay.
But they currently do not have an elevator for handicap accessibility, and we're putting in an elevator in our new building so that we do have handicap accessibility to both buildings. So we're bringing that building up to ADA compliance, which is another part of the reason that our core area is so big, is because we're adding an elevator in a common corridor so that it has access to both sides. So we've taken that into consideration in our design as well.
What's the maximum capacity for patrons?
Our patron count is, yeah, it's right around 40 to 44. Is that right? 44. Thanks, Mario. You don't text. 44.
Thank you.
Record by Mario.
Are there any other questions for the applicant at this point?
Kind of touched on this a minute ago, but outside of the obvious entrances to the building for the public being right there on 14 Mile, I see that you have a roll-up door on the alleyway as well. Would that be considered during this time of the year? You would open it up to people coming in and out?
No,
No?
I would say not, because it's distillation is happening inside, and there is I wouldn't say that it's a hazardous, but it's not something that you would want, customers and public, to be able to, have access to. So spectators, would have to stay behind the glass. Now, what we could do, which I think would be pretty cool, is, we could always open the doors and have like like a guardrail, you know what I mean, that went across so that it could be open air situation so that people could see in. That would definitely be an option, but we would absolutely have to keep the public out unless it was like a scheduled tour, where it was like, people could come in and tour the back of it. And then at that point, the distillation would not be operable.
Sure. So I guess maybe I'm confused. I was asking specifically about the roll-up door on the public alleyway. Yeah.
You're talking about
Yeah, on the west
public-
elevation, yeah.
On the west public alley.
Yeah.
Ideally, I see that alley eventually becoming something really cool.
Sure.
In the future, I could see that being an art alley. I could see sculptures in the alley. You know what I mean? Where you guys host an event and say, hey, like let's put a bunch of artisans. You know what I mean? Put a bunch of sculptures in here and let's have people tour it.
Sure.
Dennis, which I wish he was here to speak to those kinds of things, would be a big proponent of that. So one of his big requirements were, hey, let's get a door on the alley so that if this alley ever gets used in that fashion, that we can invite the public in. Yeah, so that would
Okay.
absolutely happen.
Okay.
So if that became like a deli, for instance, if we had a sculpture in the alley day, like people would be able to come right in that door, and grab sandwiches, you know what I mean, and eat at the tables.
Okay.
So,
Are there any other questions for the applicant at this point?
No, I guess one for Jim. I don't know, just off the top of your head, could you throw a ballpark figure of the percentage of the buildings that are in the downtown that are at the zero setback currently? I know a lot of them are north of 14 Mile to the east of Main Street. Quite a few of those are. Just a mixed bag.
we do have an image. We have Google image pulled up right here. If you want to take a quick peek.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, that's fine. That's fine. I was just, I know I've seen quite a few.
The alleyway.
I don't want to say 50%, 35 to 50%.
Okay.
The opposite alleyway, just to the east, all of the structures are right at the lot line.
Okay.
Yeah, north as well. I think if you go, across north, you know what I mean? Those are all, and then if you go west and across, like where you go to the Mexican restaurant, you know what I mean? Like that's right up against, you know what I mean, the alley. And even if you go east as far as the Toto building,
Sure.
The Toto building, which will always be the Toto building no matter who moves in there, that is butted right up against the alley as well.
Okay.
Have you heard from any of the adjoining neighbors? For or opposed?
We have a letter, actually, an approval from the neighbor to the east that would state that it in no way impacts their business and that they're for it. Did I say that right? Yes. Okay.
That would be the everyday yoga?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And one last question, sorry. So if the building is demolished and then the new building is constructed all the way up to the property line, I know you were showing the picture earlier of the adjacent yoga building. I think it's got a small setback. They have all looks like their utility gas meters along the back side of the building, protected with some steel bollards. On the back of the distillery, and this is, I guess, a question for Jim, does code require that they have some advanced level of fire suppression where you have to have some large fire main hookup at the back of the building or on the side of the building somewhere? And if you did, would that be sort of jutting out into the alleyway?
Well, based on the size of the building and the occupancy load being held down, I don't think I'm going to have a fire suppression hookup to that building.
Okay.
Obviously, I haven't even thought about that yet because we haven't got to the actual construction
Understood.
phases of it. So.
Okay.
But I would add that if that was the case, and right now, all of our code analysis say that we do not need one.
Okay.
But if it was the case that it was decided that we did, we would remove one of the overhead doors and we would inset the
Gotcha.
fire suppression so it was not in the alley. So we would keep, we would remove probably the left door, and we would have an inset, that was only 2 feet or, however deep we would need to hold that riser.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be in the alley.
Gotcha.
So we would make accommodations for that for sure.
Understood.
I have a question. In the picture we have up right now, I'm looking at number 30, and 32 is the one that we're building out. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
This is actually 24. I think the drawing is incorrect, and this is 30, and this is 32.
Okay. All right. Now, as it stands right now, assuming just for a second, there is no granting of the variance, how wide is that alley?
16 feet.
This is 16 feet.
16 feet. So we're talking about 16 feet all the way across out to, sorry, is that Church Avenue right there? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And that is wide enough for vehicles to go in and out through there if need be?
Correct.
Thank you.
When I said I think the 10-foot setback was for loading area, I don't know, do we have a parliamentarian here? Could you put on a requirement that the loading has to be in off hours? Since it's loading out of our alley.
We would be happy to oblige that.
I think you can do that. I know the planning commission can. I don't know on the zoning board of appeals if they can.
We would willingly accept that today.
Since the variance runs with the land, and that condition is in perpetuity, those type of operational conditions couldn't be assigned to it. However, they are still have to receive site plan approval, and we could mention that fact that during this discussion, that operational aspect was raised, and that could be part of a site plan approval condition. So they could do that.
So looking towards the future, if this business went away, they sold the building in 10 years, the variance is still there, but a new tenant would have to get site plan approval, correct, to occupy the building? And then operational conditions could be put on at that point. Is that right?
Well, in theory, we would have a site plan on file, but if our ordinance, as it is currently written, isn't enforced 10 years from now, then yeah, a change of ownership would require a new site plan from that property owner.
Well, and a change in the use of the building would
Yeah, and
require
or a
site plan
change in
too,
use.
right?
Yes, that's correct. Under the current ordinance. Yeah.
Okay. All right, are there any other questions for the applicant at this point? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
At this point, I'm going to open it up for public hearing. It's about 8:16. Is there anybody from the public wishing to speak?
Joan Horton for the DDA. And Steve is correct. The intent of, when we did our master plan, the number one thing that we heard from people was, we don't want to be Royal Oak. So we went to a lot of work to find out, what does that mean? Well, and when we sent people walking around downtown with maps, with pictures, and asked them questions to find out, they didn't want all bars and restaurants. So we even worked with, at one point, the former owner of this building, 24G, wanted to use the ground floor for office space, and we didn't allow office space. So we even talked on the first floor at that time. So we even talked to them about putting in a liner retail business in the front. So this has been something we've always looked at. When people are walking down the street, they want places that they can go to, that they can walk in, that they can do things, and not looking into the front of a restaurant all the time. So I think this plan meets the intent of our master plan. So maybe our ordinances haven't always caught up to everything, and we're actually going to be looking at some land use changes. And we can make those adjustments. Right now, though, I think this plan does meet the intent of what we're looking for. So I hope you would consider a variance.
Is there any questions for our DDA director? Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing at 8:19.
Madam Chair, I'd like to entertain a motion to enumerate the different findings that were brought up today that were not specifically presented either by our planner or through the applicant, but through the discussion today. And I'm going to go from my notes, and then my intent is that everybody should add and subtract the appropriate number and wording of things that we go onto here.
Okay.
So the first finding of fact is that there is an intent by the DDA in the master planning for the downtown development district to have a retail buffer space for downtown buildings, and that the site plan here follows that particular intent. That the second point would be that the discussion of this renovation was initiated approximately 18 months ago, which was prior to the one-year update of the downtown development / master plan that incorporated a 10-foot rear yard setback. That there is a historical building, and it's part of the renovation. It's the intent and desire of the DDA to maintain that historical building, and that this renovation supports the longevity of that historical building. The next point would be that there are state of Michigan, I believe, distillery square foot requirements that the applicant has incorporated into his plan. And the final thing, that if we did not grant the setback, those three properties in that particular block would have 3 irregular setbacks, 0, 10, and 7 to 8 foot, which doesn't create a good aesthetics or use of that particular area. And without having to go into anything else, I would entertain anybody else's items that they want to discuss or add to this particular list.
We could perhaps add the operational restrictions to hopefully take into consideration with the site plan approval with regards to loading and unloading during off hours.
And I would add to that, because it is here up in the top of my notes, that is from the experts here, the best understanding of the original intent of the 10-foot setback.
I concur.
And I guess I would have liked to add, even though I opened it up, that there is a 16-foot public alley along the entire space that is very much available for the use of any intended loading and unloading situations that the 10-foot setback might have facilitated.
Should we also include the letter from the neighbor expressing their support for the project? Or
Yes, and
not negative
Yes,
towards
and I
it?
would hope that that could be added to the official minutes.
The record. Mhm.
So we're asking the applicant to submit that letter
Yes.
Yes.
for our files. Thank you.
So does anybody else have any other findings of fact to add to Ed's list?
I think we discussed that the rear roll-up doors would not be used for customer access in and out of the building.
I would add another findings of fact that there are a number of other buildings in our downtown area that have a 0 rear setback, as stated by Jim.
Best guess on that was 35 to 50%, is that correct?
Well, you asked about the downtown, which extends beyond the 4 quadrants that we're basing our downtown off of. If if I walk up here, from this quadrant, you can see that this has a 0, that has a 0, these don't. This is 7. These are full parking spots and a little bit farther, so that's about 30 feet. This quadrant over here, all of the buildings are 0 yard setback. The quadrant to the north, all of those buildings are 0 yard setback. This quadrant over here is a mix like this one. So in the 4 quadrants, the 4 corners that most people envision as our downtown, even though our downtown extends beyond it, I can say is over 50%. Because I know 50% are occupied, and then you have a little bit more in the other 2 quadrants. But if I was talking about the entire, because, I mean, look at these buildings, they have a parking lot in front. So, and then further down, you have different. But the main 4 quadrants have over 50%. So I'm clarifying what I said earlier.
Thank you, Jim.
All right.
So would you like to take a vote on the findings of fact that we've listed?
I believe so.
Okay.
If somebody has support for this combined motion.
Now, are we including the findings of fact 1 through 5 from the planner as well, or are we using our own that we just generated in lieu of?
I believe-
This was just, my intent was this was just findings of fact from the discussion that was not presented in any of the other
Gotcha.
documentation. So this is just the stuff that we enumerated and learned today. When you go into the motion, then that might incorporate a bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
So we would like to make a motion to approve the additional findings of fact that we found upon discussion today.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have support?
Support.
Thank you. We have a motion and support. Victoria, can you take the roll?
Mr. Hildebrandt,
Yes.
Mr. Sinaki,
Yes.
Ms. Cindy Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Diane Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carried. So we have our findings of fact that we've agreed on. Is there a motion for the request?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the requested 0-yard setback, which is a 10-foot variance for, I gotta get the, where's the front sheet? For the property located at 32 East 14 Mile Road in this city central district in the city of Clawson, per the code and ordinance, Chapter 34, Land Development Regulations, Article 10, Zoning Division 23, City Central District, Section 34-1193A1, to allow for the construction of a new building within the required 10-foot rear yard setback. I would add as support to that the discussion and variance that was done by our city planners that indicates that they're and let's see where I am here. In Mr. Ortega's memo of September 12th to Jim Albus, the building director, which will be included in our minutes, he does identify the 5 review comments or 5 review criteria of statements in their number 1, that the alleged hardships or practical difficulties are exceptional or peculiar to the property and result from conditions that do not exist generally throughout the city. Based on our discussion today, we agree that there's nothing peculiar about this property from a characteristic land development, but the fact that it is in the downtown area and the fact that we have identified in our other findings of facts lead us to state that it would be not just a benefit financially to the applicant, but a benefit to the whole downtown development scenario to approve this variance. I think bullet number 2 goes to that. Bullet number 3 talks about substantial justice, which would be done to the property owners. That is a true statement. The need comes from the request of the applicant, but it is also supported by the request of the Downtown Development Authority, which incorporates the master plan, and it's in their intent to maintain the appearance, and this variance allows them to do that. And number 5 is not based on solely financial needs or circumstances. There are abiding criteria, which we have enumerated in our previous findings of fact motion.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody have anything to add to Ed's motion? Okay, I have a motion. Do I have support?
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Victoria, can you take the roll, please?
Mr. Sinaki,
Yes.
Ms. Cindy Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Diane Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It's like a beautiful building.
It's going to be great. We can all go there and drink bourbon.
Okay.
Hopefully on my next birthday, that's what I think.
What is the demolition timeline?
Well, now that we have this, we are actually
Please still
scheduled.
use the microphone.
Oh, yep.
Dave will yell at me.
Now that we have the variance approved, we're actually on the docket for Tuesday's site plan approval meeting. So we'll be back in a couple of days to present this to, for site plan approval. We already have Mario's comments back for the site plan approval items, and I believe that we have a package ready to go that has addressed every single one of them. And I would say we would be looking at probably, it might be a little late to get in this, to the ground this year. So I'm thinking spring, is when we're going to start demolition, so that once we start construction, we can go straight through. Because my concern about building on a project like this is downtime, when you're right on a downtown strip with a sidewalk. So my recommendation to the owner is going to be wait till spring so that we can demo and start construction right away, so that we don't have a lag time with public sidewalks, kind of like being disrupted. So I would say spring is going to be our nearest target.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all so much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Jim, do we have other business?
Did you want to talk in public discussion? Moving to other business, in your packet, I asked Mario to hand out the large lot ordinance and a highlighted plat map. We have a person who's looking to split a lot. And with our large lot ordinance, it falls under that criteria as a large lot. But it was the intent of the large lot ordinance to keep the same character of the neighborhood. So why I brought this to you is for 2 blocks around that location, there is 50-foot wide lots. And then behind the location, there is 47-foot wide lots. And this is the only 109-foot lot in those 2 blocks. So before that person comes before you or developer comes before you for this location, I wanted you guys to get your eyes on it, interpret whatever you guys think. There's no discussion or necessary tonight or decisions tonight. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that this one will probably be coming in front of us because the person wants to sell it to a developer to build 2 houses instead of the house that's currently on the site. And so I said I'd bring it before you guys so you could look at the actual ordinance. It might be a similar situation where Mario, by the wording of the ordinance, is going to ask for denial. But when you look at the uniqueness of the situation and the intent of the ordinance, you might interpret it differently. I interpret it differently, but it's all your jurisdiction. So that's what kind of happened tonight. Is Mario followed the ordinance. We were on the same page in his review letters, but I thought it was a unique situation tonight. So that's what, in case you thought we were conflicting in our presentations, it was, but we were on the same page.
Okay.
And that's all I have for other business for ZBA. So
Okay.
one of the bigger projects that we got going, the old AT&T building up on North Crooks Road, was bought by Mike Savoy Chevrolet. They're redoing the parking lot. It's 1330 North Crooks Road. So they're redoing the engineering outside and parking lot right now. And I walked through the site today. They have done demo on the inside of the site and are remodeling it for offices and detailing areas for sold cars and, cars that get shipped to the site, get prepped before they go out. And it's one of our old industrial buildings that was barely used, and it was a utility company, so untaxable, and now we're going to have a, not a full-blown car dealership, but one of his offices and changing stations or whatever, detailing stations. And it's going to be a wonderful project. And
Good,
just,
that's good news.
so. And that building will be fully suppressed.
Okay.
It's
Well,
just-
the reason I asked the question is because they're going to have obviously barrels full of gasoline essentially in the building if they were going to require something, a little more enhanced.
Yeah, I really haven't researched that enough. I found out because of the setback that there was square foot requirements in the state laws, or I'm not even sure if it's federal laws or state laws, because I was just asking around. I actually haven't seen it in the ordinances, but Steve verified that those square foot requirements are.
Okay.
And it is a pressurized vessel. I don't
Sure.
know, do the beer hops pressurize with the fermentation process?
Probably not to the extent these do. I think,
Yeah, so,
I think these cook a little bit hotter.
yeah. So,
I think that's why they gotta go 2 stories.
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Okay.
any questions for me?
Is the pizza joint down the road, it changed names or something?
Marconi's Pizza has, there was, the soap opera behind it was family issues with one of the partners and then a dissolving of the partnership. So Marconi's Pizza is now Carmoni's Pizza. And they're actually finally starting up to actually occupy. So
Okay,
they're reactivating all their permits and stuff, so.
good.
Good.
And I think since the last time that we met, the Italian restaurant there, Zioli's, it's opened up now.
Zioli's is open. I don't believe they've had the grand opening yet, so it's a soft opening. They've been open for about 2 weeks. I've eaten there, wonderful food. There's a Ducati motorcycle on the wall, so I used to race, and my dad used to race Ducatis. I race KTMs, so it's fun to me.
Nice,
And wonderful people that are running it, so.
good.
Good. Good. Okay. Any other questions for Jim?
I have a more or less off-the-record question. When you go with these older buildings and you get the renovations, when I was looking at today, there's a lot of electrical lines and meters and boxes and everything on the historical building on the side of there in the alley. Does that get cleaned up with this type of a site plan review so that, if you wanted to use that alley as a meeting place or whatever, it would take a heck of a lot of paint at a minimum to say that anybody would want to display something behind that. And it would seem to me that you'd want to, start removing large, 1910 telephone poles and stuff like that.
You was just saying it was historic. Yeah, that would be Ameritech AT&T adjusting those poles and lines. I think at one point they were talking about taking that side alley and putting those all underground, but we have brick pavers there, and people use it as an alley into Da Nang and what is just south of Da Nang? Is that a hair salon? Yeah.
And a dentist.
Oh, yeah, there's a medical office down there.
Then yeah.
So here's another question kind of along those lines. He brought it up about the utilities. Would this be in a new building now, are the DTE requirements now that they have to have their service underground?
DTE has walked away from that requirement.
Okay.
So, that.
Not on
will-
residential though, right?
Yeah, even on residential.
Really?
Yep. So, all the new homes coming into, Clawson still have overhead lines coming to them.
Really? Huh. Wonder what the reasoning was, because that was pretty new, right? That was a requirement they started, what, just 4 or 5 years ago?
Yes, they came out and said everybody's got to put them underground, and then within a month, they said, never mind.
Really?
It was,
Costs too
yeah,
much.
People
I
come by
agree.
and
I
infect it.
like having the services underground, but
Sure.
it was just they didn't have the personnel to start installing them.
Huh.
I think that's why they dropped it, so. But yeah, it'll get cleaned up. I can't guarantee when, though. So, because he won't be working on the wall where that service comes in. That's the historical side of that building. So, I guess we could
think
ask.
aesthetically it'll be pleasing. It won't have that odd U in there.
It's definitely a nice building. I mean, this is what would this be the first brand new from the ground up building in Clawson since when?
Yeah. Well, let's see. What we did tore down the Tri-Center Steel building that Tamara used to own, and we put up the CVS and the strip mall across from the traditional Clawson shopping center. So those were all new buildings in
Okay.
there. So
But not downtown.
No.
not downtown.
Yeah.
Yes. So when he starts digging, we don't know what he's going to find.
Yeah.
Because
Might find Jimmy Hoffa.
down
We might.
South Main, like around 16 South Main, to the other side, it used to be, in Da Nang, it used to be the bank vault basement. So I guess in the 1920s, they had an underground tunnel that they used to transport liquor back and forth.
It'd be a
Across
nice
the
little
street.
item to display, an old liquor bottle.
Because I've been in the
cool.
basement of 16 South Main, which is on the other side, in Mahmood's building, and you can actually see the old opening, but I don't know if it's there. And then the train track used to run down those streets, so sometimes when you excavate, you run into old rails and ties and everything, so.
So is he going down to all the way down to put new footings in and everything, right?
Correct, because
Okay.
the original building was designed as one story, so.
Wow. How's he gonna? Just curious. I mean, I guess it's a means and methods thing, but I wonder how he's gonna shore up the adjacent buildings to keep those from caving in.
That is an engineering issue, and then the vibrations from excavating and stuff with these older buildings, it causes headaches, so.
Yeah. Huh.
so.
They have an estimated completion date?
They didn't give that. I was expecting them to break ground this winter, because if you've seen or walked the downtown, he's already gutted the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So with him pulling off until spring, maybe all of his
That
contractors.
surprised me. I didn't think that would be the case, but I understand it.
He can complete it in one season. I mean, it's not that big of a project, so.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.